When'd you get in?
I just drove in from Asheville.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we got live mics here too. Yeah, we've been hanging out there since the OBS sale, which has been pretty cool. Charlotte and Asheville. Let's go skiing.
Good, how are you doing?
That's it. That's it.
You gotta fight your way in now. That actually got fun.
See, Kenny, what's happening?
Good to see you. All right, buddy. How you doing? Keith Flats.
Kenny.
Good to see you. Plastic table. This is a little bit.
Kerry, are we paid by the hour or the question?
Should be.
Oh.
Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Go ahead and get started because we only have an hour to conduct this panel. Hopefully, we'll be joined by a few more. My name is Alaire Ryan. I am Director of Sales at Lanes End Farm and current President of the CBA. I want to welcome everybody here and thank our panelists for joining us. The deal or no deal discussion was kind of born out of the desire to create a candid but educational dialogue between sale participants about vet findings in yearlings. So we're here today to just listen to the stories and experiences and hopefully be enlightened by the various perspectives of our panel members. So those include, from closest to me to the very end, we have Dr. Rob Cook. We have Rob Tribbett, who is representing commercial breeder Fred Hertrick, Watercress Farm. We have Dr. Nathan Cheney, classic winning trainer Kenny McPeak, and then Dr. Keith Latson. So we'll go ahead and get started. There are a few of us CBA board directors that will be asking each panelist a specific question, and they'll have 5-10 minutes to give us their thoughts. So without further ado, I'll hand off to Renee.
Thank you. I'm Renee Daly, and I'll address my question to Dr. Cook. As a veterinarian that sees a lot of sales weanlings and yearlings, what developmental radiographic findings are seen in young horses that often resolve and/or are insignificant when they mature?
Okay, I'm glad to see everybody that came out today. And before I kind of get to the question, I can get on my soapbox. I think what y'all are doing here today is important. Education. As somebody who works for a lot of people that sell horses, we have buyers and we hear all the time people come up and look at their sheets and see comments on the reports. They either don't understand or they see a lot of writing and they think the horse has problems that make the horse unsuitable for purchase. And I think everybody that buys horses needs to understand that these reports are radiographic findings that may or may not be significant to the horse's soundness long-term or ability to pinhook. And certainly we see over the past few years where the repository's been going on. In the past, vets relied on their own experience. But fortunately now we have large studies with thousands of horses where we can statistically look and see what type of problems actually become a problem and other issues that are maybe just perceived problems aren't really problems at all. One of the most common findings on weanlings radiographs that you'll see certainly coming up this fall will be either a sagittal ridge lucency, mid-sagittal ridge lucency. There's a lot of different ways that these terms are used, and that's probably part of the veterinarian's fault, really, for not being stringent in our vocabulary. But the problem with our vocabulary is we all understand it, but unfortunately a lot of times the buyers don't. And that vocabulary is used to be accurate with a few number of words, whereas describing something we see and just describing the way it looks, which is often what happens, makes it much less accurate. So unfortunately, I think that there's some loss there in trying to make the reports understandable and complete that in language. So you need to really pay attention when you're reading these reports, what they say. Look for key words like mild, moderate, severe. You're not going to see it if it goes past moderate, honestly. What you're probably going to see is just a comment on it. It's going to say sesamoiditis instead of mild sesamoiditis. So there are no guidelines on these reports other than if it is on the report, if it is in the radiographs, it must be on the report. So that does lead to a lot of things that can be on the report that are not significant long-term. As far as the sagittal ridge lucencies, those are often maturity issue. They can be bad, and there are horses that have soundness issues with them long-term, but those are certainly the exception and not the rule. Generally, my feeling is if the vast majority of horses, say 95 out of 100, end up being okay, certainly that's not significant to me, but the comment's still on the report because the finding is there. So those sagittal ridge lucencies oftentimes go away. I have a lot of guys that buy 2-year-olds and will buy some yearlings, excuse me, and will buy some pretty moderately deep sagittal ridge lucencies, and those things can still go ahead and heal as they mature. Probably the next finding would certainly be OCDs or lucencies with or without fragment. If it says lucency, no fragment, it's not actually an OCD by definition. OCD means generally there's a fragment sitting there. And those horses, when I say they go away by the time they're yearlings, often by the time they're offered for sale, they have been cleaned up. Those lesions have been removed. Not purchasing a horse because it has an OCD or a P1 chip, those are, to me, in my mind, aren't often a good choice if you like the horse otherwise, because you can often buy at a slightly reduced rate. Once the horse is cleaned up, most of those lesions are never significant for the horse, particularly hock OCDs, which are probably the most common one. OCDs off the back of P1 in the hind fetlock is also quite common. Those are easily removed, and the horses often never have an issue with it, or rarely have an issue with it once removed. So for me, while that's a finding that doesn't go away on its own, if we can fix it with an excellent prognosis, I don't see any reason not to purchase the horse. The horse that worries me the most is the immature horse in November. It came from New York. It was born in May and has a clean report. That horse worries me some in that I don't know, especially if you don't get to see the horse physically, just how mature the horse is. There are certainly a lot of horses that are clean in November that can develop stifle OCDs later on. That seems to be one of the more common OCDs that you don't want to show up in January on your clean weanling that you just purchased. They certainly do happen. Fortunately, it's not very many of them. It's probably somewhere under 5% that those occur in. But if it's your 5%, that's significant. Fortunately, again, location, size, and where that OCD is, they're not all the same. Just because you see OCD in the stifle and you go, I've had one of those, the horse did terribly, doesn't mean that every horse will. Actually, most of them do quite well depending on where they're located. Stifle cyst or medial femoral condyle lucencies are often seen in weanlings. Of over 60% of those will resolve. So, or improve to some degree. So it really depends on the size. I think if you look at the ones that are maybe under 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters at that age, you probably have a higher percentage of those that resolve than have maybe a deeper lucency. So it does require, it's not just the writing on the report. You need to take everything into consideration when you look at these horses. You need to look at the maturity level. Where they came from, possibly, if they've been sick, if there's any other signs on why this horse is behind. A lot of these things will resolve even in some of your older weanlings. I think those are knee spurs. Probably the other thing that you see on reports, particularly very immature weanlings, can have some fairly sharp upper joints, particularly on the intermediate carpal bone when they're young. I kind of discovered that doing a survey on a bunch of yearlings, or weanlings, in July, about this time. Some of them weren't weanlings, but a lot of them had spurs. And I was like, how do all these horses have spurs? Started realizing as I followed that group that actually a lot of those do go away. I was of the opinion that spurs don't go away. If you have them, they're there. The only spur that I don't like is one that has a large opposing spur, or potentially one in the lower joint of the knee, and that's typically on the radiocarpal bone. I think those are really the only ones that for me is going to be a no deal on a young horse, because those aren't going to go away. They don't seem to get better, and they don't have as good of a return to racing if you end up owning the horse, which it can be hard to sell. If they develop a fragment in that area, they don't have a very good return to racing. So, but in general, I think when you're looking at weanling reports, you're going to see a lot of sagittal ridges, a lot of sesamoiditis. You're probably going to see OCDs and chips, quite a few. These horses haven't been surveyed, still growing. We haven't cleaned anything up on the vast majority of them, and you can fix these problems. They're certainly treatable. So don't see a report with a lot of writing on it and turn and walk away.
Thank you, Dr. Cook.
I'm Carrie Brogdon with Mockmer Hall, and I think a big part of Rob and my friendship has developed when I text him, "Congratulations on your grade 1 winner," and you reply back to me, "Yeah, too bad it didn't vet." Anyway, so as a prominent commercial breeder, how do you feel yearling x-rays have affected the racing outcomes of your program graduates, if they have? Based on your experience raising and selling yearlings, what specific findings can you cite as likely limitations in the sales ring, but not on the racetrack?
Well, first of all, I think, for all of us that are commercial breeders that see a lot of yearlings, we're still not seeing that many in the realm of having firm data and a real sample size. And some of the studies that Dr. Cook talked about, I think, are very important of educating our buyers. And I think that's something as sellers, as an industry, we've done a very poor job of educating people about what actually matters. Because while I don't have a huge sample size, I do know that regularly, on a yearly basis, we're selling horses that are punished in the sale ring that perform, and even perform in ways, sesamoiditis became a 4-letter word a few years ago. And we had a horse in September, we really liked the horse. Every vet looked at the horse, and the horse would not be a 2-year-old. It's too much sesamoiditis. Till next June, when it was our first 2-year-old winner of the year, ran a grade 1 in Saratoga. And I think probably everyone here that sees a lot of yearlings has a story like that. And I think, that's where, in the second part of the question, what findings can impact you in the sale ring? Unfortunately, the answer is any, because I think Dr. Cook made a great point that some people will see a report, and if it doesn't say NSA all the way down the page, they're on the next horse. And I think one of the challenges that we all face is, a sale like this, which is small, we all have a lot of time, the buyers have a lot of time, nobody's behind, and hopefully they have the right relationship with their vet to understand what that means and to really look at where the horse was raised, how old is the horse, what's his conformation issues, what are my plans with the horse, which I think all of those things need to be part of the judgment when you're looking at passing or failing a horse, because the degree of variability in a finding and what that means for the horse on the racetrack are very large. And I think all the vets would agree with that, but unfortunately that doesn't always get to the purchaser. So I think it's very important that we try to make sure everyone understands the things that will impact a horse, because none of us as sellers, we don't want to sell horses that are going to be lame. And if there are issues, severe issues like a crushed hock or a fractured sesamoid or changes in the knee that are going to impact the horse on the track, we understand that is something that will impact the horse. But you take a horse into book 4 in Keeneland and you're feeling very good and it's got a little lucency on the hind ankle, and all of a sudden you're stuck with the horse. Definitely, I think all of us have some frustration about that. And that's where what impacts the horse on the track and what impacts in the ring, unfortunately, have become very disparate things. And I think that's, we really have to look at every horse that goes to the ring has a lot of risk in its future racing performance. And how much of that can we really tie back to a yearling survey that we're taking one snapshot of the horse right before sale, and we're trying to look in a crystal ball and say this horse will make it to the track, will not make it to the track. So I think it's so important that anyone that's buying horses or selling horses has a relationship with their vet where they can understand what these findings mean. We're very fortunate. We have a very great relationship with our vet who we've used a long time, and he's able to help us understand that something may impact us in the ring because people are a little wary of them, but the chances that it impacts the horse on the track are not high. So we've started in recent years, we're willing to take those horses to a 2-year-old training sale, take them to the track, and every year, without fail, there are horses that had 10 repository hits, 2 scopes, and we RNA them for 40. We take them to OBS, they're never lame a single day. You sell them for 160, 200,000, 300,000. Because the reason a horse doesn't perform on the track, I found, is not very rarely because of a finding on a sheet that's taken once before sale. It's because of other factors, the horse's ability and how he was raised in his pedigree. So I just really think that all of us as commercial breeders really need to come together with the industry to make sure that buyers can be more educated. And I think Dr. Cook made a lot of great points about what does matter and what can change. But unfortunately, I still think as much research has been done, we're not getting that to the people who are buying horses.
Thanks for that, Rob. Conrad Banderoff, Denali stud. Dr. Cheney, as a vet that sees a lot of yearlings and does a lot of work at the racetrack and does a lot of work at the 2-year-old sales, do you find that you recommend 2-year-olds that have breezed well or proved their soundness that as yearlings and maybe still as 2-year-olds have questionable radiographs? And can you cite some common lesions that if they perform well and prove their soundness, you're still okay to recommend to a client?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with what Rob said. Most of the time I've found, other than a couple lesions on x-rays, that what we see at the sale, especially as yearlings, don't really stop a horse on the racetrack. But as far as common lesions that I would recommend a 2-year-old that's performed well, hind ankle chips, upper knee joint spurs, sesamoiditis that scans well, those types of things, if they can hold up to that, I think that, you certainly have to keep that in mind, that's you'd have to be okay with it. At the sale, at the 2-year-old sale, I put a lot of stock in my physical exam. I think we kind of forget that we get into this, into this sale, and we think that all of them are vetted as yearlings, but at that point they're racehorses, and they have to be gone over, palpated, flexed, jogged, all of that. So I put a lot of stock in that and let that determine whether those lesions are significant or not. at that point. I think another thing we have to think about, and I think Kenny would agree, you know, there's there's a big difference in proving yourself at a eighth or a quarter and proving yourself at 5/8 and getting to the race. And I'm going to touch back on what Rob said. You know, there's about 3 things that we see that'll stop a horse on the racetrack, I think. Lower knee joint, bone bruising, tibia, suspensory. And, you know, only one of those really are we evaluating at the sales on radiographs. So, you know, that's something that everybody needs to keep in mind. And I don't know that I have an answer for evaluating bone bruising because they haven't started getting it yet as a 2-year-old. And tibias either. So, you know, that's something that, you know, I think everybody needs to keep in mind, that a lot of these lesions that we see on these x-rays are really not that significant as yearlings, especially if they can make it to a 2-year-old sale and perform well and have a normal physical. So.
That's great. Thanks, Dr. Cheney.
Okay, my question is to trainer Kenny McPeak, who has trained horses for us in past and is also a very good friend. You are very well known for buying imperfect horses, both in terms of conformation and in vet work, including a champion filly bred by Windstar through us. What do you draw the line at? What are some of the best value examples in your stable, and what were their issues?
So thanks, Carrie. You know what? This is a whole game, and it's a big riddle we all play. So the first thing that I do is I worry about the conformation of a horse. A horse has to have what I call all the right points, and I've used the analogy over the years that horses are like constellations, and they have to have all the points in their angles and the way they move through themselves. And so, of course, the topic here is vet exams. I do not buy horses that have stifle issues. I believe hip makes the horse. I'm lucky in that over the course of my career, when I buy a horse, I get to take it through the process of developing and seeing which horses and where they have problems. And Nathan does my vet work. So when I get a horse as a yearling and I see a horse that I'm really crazy about, and he comes back and he says, you know, OCD in his stifle, I'm like, okay, that's not one I can go for. But I believe Swiss Godiver had OCDs in her hocks, something like that. But well, anyway, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to turn me off. You know, Curlin had an yeah, and so we don't, I'm more worried about the physical structure of the horse, and then it's a matter of what can I handle? What can I deal with? Can I handle spurs in the knees? Eskimo Kisses had spurs in the knees. They turned her down completely. You know, Curlin had an OCD and an ankle the size of a dime. And when I bought him, and I had 2 vets come and look, take x-rays, said, what's prognosis? They said, give him time, he'll be fine. I bought a horse one time that had 8 OCDs in his front legs. 8. And I told the owner, I said, he's a runner. We're just going to have to buy him and forget about him for a while. We brought him back 9 months later, and he never couldn't even find him. It was crazy. He ended up starting over 100 times and just a hard knocker. So, but it depends. I mean, we had a horse last year that Nathan sent to me, and he said, well, he's got some issues in the hind sesamoids. And I said, but he's a beautiful horse. And he's like, well, you got risk there. So he pitches it back to me. Well, you got risk here. I told the owner, I said, let's go to 20. He brought 18. I bought him, put him in training. I think we galloped him for 2 months, and everything fell apart. Ended up giving him away as a riding horse. So that's the risk reward, you know. And you know, so and every horse is an individual, and you've just got to figure out, you know, if they're back in the knee, over in the knee, if they're turned in and out, those kind of things I can handle to some extent as long as they have balance and they have the hind leg. And when Nathan comes back with this and that, and here's what you're dealing with, then I've got to decide in my mind, what can I accept and what can I not accept? because I'm investing somebody's money, and I try to do it wisely. And of course, it is a game of failure, as we all know. And then I've got to go through the process of when I put them in training, which ones are successful and unsuccessful. And that for me is a learning process too. You know, you've got horses over the years that I can remember that a lot of people turned down that made a lot of money. And then I've had those that vetted perfect that could not run anything. So it all, you know, it's all a guess.
It's important for us concerners to know the relationship between your veterinarians and the owners, and how much emphasis the owners really make a decision whether they're going to buy the horse or not. I know it's based on recommendations for the veterinarians, but you could, if the vets anyway, could discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, well, as far as the owners, you know, most of my clients depend on me to make the decisions for them. Very few at this point in my career are looking over my shoulder per se. But you know, for example, when I come to Paramount, you tell me, hey, I've got this, and you'll give me a tip, or certainly I've found that consigners in general are very open, especially the ones that have been at this a long time, about here's a horse that has an x-ray, you should check it out. And you know, I find that people are very honorable in that. At the same time, you know, they're trying to sell a horse and maximize return, and yet I'm trying to buy a horse and maximize return. So it's a good balance, and I can't give you one person. I was telling people today, I can walk this grounds and I feel like I've got a good relationship with everybody that sells horses here, because you're very forthright. It's not easy. Sometimes we're walking a balance of you're presenting a horse for an owner and I'm buying one for an owner, and we've got to figure out how the market matches.
All good points. Thank you, Kenny. Dr. Latson, sesamoiditis is quite a common finding in sales yearlings, ranging from mild to moderate to severe. What insight can you offer with regards to your tolerance level of sesamoiditis as a vet who examines a lot of young horses for end users?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one that has really come to the forefront, like it's been mentioned here. There are about 4 or 5 really important bullet point nuggets that I've heard already. One is, how open is your communication and how long is your history and conversation with your vet as a buyer? Number 2 is, what's the conformation of the horse? Number 3 is it actually sesamoiditis or that radiographic change that is going to affect the horse, or is it something else that could be related to that radiographic change? When we talk about sesamoiditis, I think it's really important to understand mechanically that sesamoid bones, they're all individuals. I look at every sesamoid bone as an individual, not as necessarily a set, not as the front sesamoids, hind sesamoids, but as an individual. And those sesamoids are in the unenviable position of being tugged in 2 directions their entire life. And so every time that horse takes a step, you've got the suspensory pulling up, you've got distal sesamoidian ligaments pulling down, so it can create that hammock. You all know the mechanics of how that works. So what we have to expect is that a bone under that kind of stress, and that small of a bone, has got to have some adaptive change over time. So when I see sesamoiditis in a yearling, I expect to see some level of sesamoiditis. I expect to see some level of sesamoiditis, although at a reduced rate in a 2-year-old. Sesamoiditis is not a 4-letter word for me when I'm looking at horses. It can be a sentinel for other things that are going on. When we start getting into that mild to moderate and moderate and into severe sesamoiditis. It's very rare that I'll look at a horse that has severe sesamoiditis. In my view, somebody else may call that moderate sesamoiditis that I may call severe. But in those cases, when we're tending into that mild to moderate and into moderate sesamoiditis, I start thinking, okay, what is that an indication of? Is it that the bone's trying to adapt and it's not, for whatever reason, it's not recovering and it's not adapting as it should be or in a timely manner? Or is it that there's something else in the soft tissues that we need to be looking at? I have gone back into my records in yearlings that I have some description of sesamoiditis. I generally scan 20% of those that I mentioned sesamoiditis. We got to recognize, though, that yearlings are healing machines, right? So they even if we have a finding of sesamoiditis, if it scans well, then we may be in a good position if we have that conversation with our clients and say, look, in terms of longevity, we're still in good shape here, but it may affect how we manage this horse out of the sale. I think that's an important part of the conversation. As we get into the 2-year-old sales and we scan those and we see maybe a little fiber disruption, we see some enlargement of the suspensory branches associated with the sesamoiditis, then we're really having a conversation in the end user as a buyer of how do we need to manage it out of the sale? Does that fit your program? And is that a risk you're willing to take on this horse that maybe you're trying to make some sort of early race with? And so that's how I approach sesamoiditis with my clients. I'm fortunate to have a handful of pretty prolific buyers who understand what my tolerance level is. I understand what their purposes are, what their objectives are. And I think that's where oftentimes when sesamoiditis becomes a negative word, there's some gap in that communication and in the relationships, or a gap in the understanding of the veterinarian's impression or description of sesamoiditis. And so that comes back to that relationship with the veterinarian. And for me, it also is about the relationship with the consignor and the ability to talk openly about what I found, what we saw in the scan. Have you all scanned it before? Because this is a foundation point for us in the next exam 60 days down the road, or 6 months down the road when I see a yearling back in another sale in March or April or whenever at a 2-year-old sale. So that's how I approach it. It's kind of a holistic approach rather than saying sesamoiditis, bad, it's a deal killer. Generally, it's not a deal killer. It is a conversation, and it's a manageable thing.
Just kind of dovetailing into the scan topic, is there any specific degree of sesamoiditis that prompts you to scan, or do you approach it from if a horse has sesamoiditis in any part, medial, lateral, front, hind, do you ultrasound it regardless?
No, like I said, I only scan about 20% of those that I have any description of sesamoiditis. So 1 out of 5 I end up scanning. And so 80% of horses, I feel like what I see is regular adaptive change on that radiograph. When I start to see things that are some irregular funnel shapes, I start to see some roughening associated with irregular shapes. Then I start to think, okay, let's cover our bases. We know that if we can get this horse moving in all directions after the sale and just kind of vary the stresses that are on that sesamoid by allowing that horse to move in all directions, we can manage that sesamoiditis. But if we have changes in the soft tissues associated with that, that also has to be a part of that conversation. So I'm looking for distinct irregularities versus what I would consider to be adaptive change.
Okay, great, thank you. as part of our closing, or as a way to kind of summarize or end this Q&A, I'd like to just candidly ask each of you to name a successful racehorse from memory that may not have passed at the time that it was sold, weanling, yearling, 2-year-old. Tell us a story, tell us an anecdote of one that really sticks out in your mind. Kenny, I know you've mentioned a few already, but just enlighten us with some memories that you have from sales past.
Fortunately, I had to think about this for a while. A couple of the older track vets told me you weren't really anybody until you failed some Derby horses, which I haven't done. I think I failed one that was in the Derby, but didn't run well. I think that was the last race. There was one that was a filly here that had moderate sesamoiditis on a farm, was never clinical, scanned well, horse was put together well, walked well, looked like an athlete. Client just loved the horse. Told him he'd never get it sold at a yearling sale. He didn't get it sold. Everybody is on it. She didn't pass, went down, OBS, sold in, or went through, I believe it was the March sale. Again, worked lights out. It was a nice filly, looked great, matured well. Sesamoiditis was still there, still scanned well. Good physical exam. Client asked me, what should I do with her? And I said, you know, everybody's on her. No one's going to pass her. They were trying to decide where to set the reserve. Set the reserve, I think, it wasn't much. I think maybe sold her for $1,700. She ran out 906,000. I got a call every time she ran, unfortunately, and felt bad. Now that's one in hindsight. Would I change it? Moderate sesamoiditis to me is always a concern, and it depends on the client. I've had clients specifically that will buy those horses because they plan on racing them as 3-year-olds, and they may trail ride and do a variety of different things, work cows on them, just do a variety of things to help those horses mature. But the horse that I passed on was Have You Gone Away, and I wish I had kept it because she would end up at the farm probably one day having babies, but it happens. It's still a guess. So.
Oh, I think it's kind of a similar story. The one that really changed me about how I'm looking at vetting and when we're selling a horse, setting the reserve, we had a filly out of a Stormcat mare, book one at Keeneland. We absolutely loved this filly. Just knew she was going to bring $250,000, $300,000, $200,000 reserve, and it's just crickets. Like, okay, no big deal. It's book one. Somebody will come back. Nobody comes back. Nobody comes back. Finally, somebody comes back, and I really like your horse, but she doesn't vet. Well, what do you mean she doesn't vet? She's fine. Well, she's got sesamoiditis. Yeah, but okay, let's make a deal then. So we wanted to move the horse on. All our vets are, everybody said no already. So now we feel like we better sell this horse. So we sell the horse for $40,000. A horse that we thought was worth $250,000. She goes, and I look at the catalog in OBS March. I'm like, this horse was supposed to be a racehorse. It was sold to a very smart horseman who was planning on racing the horse. So go to March, it works great. I say, well, what about the horse that sesamoids? How did you fix them? Like, I need to know how you fix sesamoiditis because we're gonna be in good shape now. And he said, I didn't do anything. What do you mean you didn't do anything? We trained the horse. The guy who was breaking the horse for me said, this is a really good horse. Too bad about the sesamoiditis. We take another x-ray in January, February, and now it's gone. And the horse was a successful stakes horse. And I think it's just so important that that's another example that we all have of any of these findings, as everyone's mentioned, are not black and white findings on most of these things, but I just feel like we're still fighting the battle that they often get treated that way.
So when Renee informed me I had to come up with a horse about 30 minutes ago, what I thought I would do is throw this back at Carrie Brogdon, because she always loves to let us know as vets when she likes to she doesn't mind texting you, But no, to be honest, I try to be as open-minded as I can be when I'm vetting a horse, so I hope I don't have too many of those stories. But I do remember one from last year, 2-year-old sale, vetted it, and had a tear in the hind branch, moderate sesamoiditis, and you know, failed the horse pretty much. Went for big money, there was a bit of drama, and ended up sending the horse back. My client had nothing to do with it. Had another client wanted me to vet it again in Kentucky. Same thing, even though I vetted it down there, I vetted it again, same result, didn't pass. Well, now the horse is doing well. And I get to hear about that one quite a bit, but I don't think I would have changed what I did, you know. I think torn suspensory branches are okay until they're not, you know. And when they're not, you got a problem. So, but anyway, I can count on Carrie to let me know. She keeps us all straight.
I've got a long list. I can't even begin to tell you how many that haven't passed that I bought anyway. Dream Empress, chips in both front ankles, beautiful filly. I bought her on spec with my own money. Sent her from the sale straight to the Rin Riddle. Dr. Bramlage, take these out. Didn't have a buyer for a week. I'm like, okay. One client called, see anything good? I said, well, I got this filly over at the farm. She's had 2 chips taken out of her ankle, but she's okay. She won the Alcibiades. Curlin was the best story ever. That horse, six clients turned that horse down. I bought him and I sent him over to the original owners, and they called the farm manager, said, Kenny, did you even look at this damn horse? Did you see his ankle? And I said, I saw it. And I said, I x-rayed it 2 different vets, and it'll be okay. He says, we don't want him. And I said, okay, I'll come pick him up. And so the one partner called and said, Kenny, you're never buying a horse from me ever again because you bought this horse with a bad ankle. And I said, look, he's got a body of a Greek god, and your budget was 50 something, so you got to give somewhere. It's a nice horse. He said, we're done with you. So the other partner calls and says, everybody's really upset that you bought this horse with a bad ankle. And I said, you know, I got it. I'll pick the horse up as fast as I can get him. And he asked me one question that I wish today I had never heard. He said, what are you going to do with him? And I said, that's easy. I said, I'm going to partner him. I'm going to put a group together. We're going to partner him out, and we're going to race him. And I'm going to keep a quarter. And he said, oh, you're going to keep a quarter? And he said, well, if you keep a quarter, I'll take a quarter. And I said, all right, fine. We got half of him done. Let's find 2 other people, and let's race this horse. Next day, the other guy that had chewed me out says, we're going to keep the damn horse, but we're not happy you bought a horse with a bad ankle. And I called Bill. I said, well, hey, what was that about? He said, well, he figured if you were going to keep a piece that the horse probably was going to be okay. And I said, well, so am I in or am I out? And he says, we're just going to keep him ourselves. Damn it. So anyway, when he broke his maiden by 12 or 13 lengths, I was there that day. I said, I guess that ankle's okay, isn't it? And then, of course, the rest of it we know. Oh, my goodness. And then I was involved in another deal with Candy Ride, and I was on the fringes of that horse, and I had a chance to buy that horse for $500,000. And all the vets turned him down because he had irregular sesamoids. And Ron McAnally ended up with the horse because the vet in Argentina said, don't worry about it. He's a runner. He can run. Just take him. And so he had, obviously, you know, a client that took him. And I can give you a list of other ones. I mean, not of the level of Curlin or Candy Ride or Eskimo Kisses is one of my favorites because lipping in her knees. That was an easy one for me because it's how you train a horse, and you've got to keep the pace of their workouts under control, and you have to run them long and keep them long. And she never had knee problems, did she, Neil? She did pretty good. I think we sold her for $2.3 million. And then, I don't know, we didn't talk anything about throats today. And I don't know why. And it kind of popped in my head. And we probably should because throats are, you know, that's a big deal too. I'm going to leave that one to the vets, but throats are, you know, you can stop a deal on a throat, and I think horses are scoped too much. I don't know how you solve that problem. But there needs to be some sort of limits on that, because horse getting scoped 10, 12, 15 times is brutal. And I actually can tell you, I don't really like, I'm not even big on scoping fillies at all, because fillies don't have retinoid problems. And palate issues you really don't surface until they get to the racetrack. And usually those aren't extreme. But fillies, colts with big long necks or colts that are growthy tend to have retinoid issues. And those I would definitely, so that Nathan checked that one out close, and he's usually really good, asymmetric. So you guys take it from there.
Well,
since
I
we left
agree.
that one off.
I agree. Well, I mean, I'll just keep that simple, but asymmetric throats, everybody wants to know where they're going to go, and the answer is we don't know which way they're going to go. But I do think colts tend to go the wrong way more often than fillies.
Well, sir, I'll talk a little bit about that. I think the video scoping is a great idea. The equipment's improved a lot. Most people are doing them relatively close to the sale, and they are required to be done within a certain number of days. It certainly makes a difference. Again, people are looking for that grade 1 throat. I think Scott Pierce, I don't know what year it was, published a really good research paper on throats and how they change over time. The vast majority of them don't. They stay the same or get better. Most of them don't get worse. There are horses that do. And I think certainly identifying the really large colts that you got to worry about, I think, is he ataxic too? Those I'm going to worry about. But certainly 2A throats, I've had a lot of pinhookers that will avoid any 2A throat. There's a huge range of 2A. There's a 2A that's almost a grade 1, and that's probably the vast majority of horses fall in that category. And when you see 2A on a report, you don't need to run. You do need to have someone scope it, though, or at least look at the video, because you can have a 2A that's clearly really hard to get to open. And in reference to weanlings, I think weanlings typically are the ones that we see the most improvement out of, generally because it's probably behaviorally related. They are a booger to scope sometimes, just because they don't want to cooperate whatsoever. And so sometimes the read you get on them is not accurate, or it's maybe a little bit better than you see it today, just because they'll cooperate later. My take on scopes, if it's, as long as they are functional. I've had too many horses that were even 2A, 2B that go on and race. So I think that walking up and looking for a grade 1, I think it's a mistake. We should say that they work or they don't, because the 2A range is so huge that it can be a 2A, but just one that I wouldn't recommend, or one that I think most horses fall under, and that's kind of the spectrum. It's huge. So you really need to take a look at the video and not just walk away.
I want to add on to this discussion. Having been out in Southern California and practicing there for a little over 10 years on that circuit, and doing a lot of surgery there, throats, arthroscopies, all of those things, I have to mention that the number of 2A and 2B throats that I would scope on a routine basis that did not need surgery was much greater than the number of horses that we were doing tiebacks on. For me, out here, a 2A throat is a perfectly fine racing throat. A 2B throat, if I occlude that nostril and he has a nice huge throat, if that horse has a nice huge throat, that doesn't take that horse off the table for me, the 2B grade. Certainly it requires a conversation between my client and me. Okay, here's the potential risk. And look, we have such skilled surgeons out there doing tiebacks now that the success rate is quite good. So I think when we're talking about 2B throats, for me, if they've got that nice big throat, when you occlude the nostrils, it's a 2B. The main thing that the trainer, you can comment on this, but I think the main thing that you're going to hear from the trainer is, or from the vet when it gets in the shed row is, oh, it's asymmetrical, oh, it's a little slow on the left. And so if you have a trainer who can tolerate hearing that because the horse is running and doing fine, then that's a perfectly acceptable throat to me. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, you can hear horses when you watch them gallop, especially the second half of their gallops, and I like to place myself somewhere where I can hear them. In Europe, they actually have a different process when you buy a horse, years back at least, that you didn't scope it. You did a wind test on a farm, and they gallop it past, and you'd listen. Because you can hear a lot of things. I mean, so irregardless of what the veterinarian says, if I hear that this horse is making a little extra noise or there's a little whistle, because you can tell the difference between a horse that has a retinoid that's blocking its airway and a horse that's displacing. And so a lot of that information you can gather, watching a horse train.
Yeah, I think this is another great example of where education needs to happen from sellers and vets to their buyers, because, as you said, so many people hear 2B or 2A and automatically the horse doesn't scope. And I think we've all had horses at a sale that they might have 10 scopes, and this guy says the horse doesn't scope. Well, the other 9 vets did, and the horse prints 400,000 and is a stakes horse. So I think that is, for all of us as sellers, I'm sure there's a lot of frustration that this isn't it's not a guarantee the horse is going to have a problem, and it's not a guarantee the horse is going to be fine if he's a grade 1. So I think that's where, can we put some data to this, and can we really make sure that our buyers are understanding, 2A is just a variation of normal. It's not necessarily anything that means the horse is going to have a wind problem.
What I try to avoid is analysis paralysis. I think vets are great, but at the same time, if I have to have NSF on every marking, then I'm never going to buy a horse. And so I think that buyers need to be a little more open-minded. They need to listen to their veterinarians, but they need not to let a small finding stop their chance to maybe buy the next champion. You never know. And you got to there's some give and take. I think the vets need to give you as much information as they can without stopping a sale, and I think they do the best they can. They want to feed you the right info, but you've got to figure out, where the balance is. There are people that, he's right, there are people that won't buy a horse unless it's perfect. I mean, it doesn't exist. This doesn't exist.
I think it's where we see, we're going to see in the TDN after the sale that somebody's going to buy a horse that checked all the boxes. I know we all hate that phrase, but in the end, I think the goal should be to buy what Kenny's buying is we're trying to buy racehorses. And I think so many people want to buy the horse that's perfect, that is perfect, but the goal is to buy a horse that's going to win a grade 1. And that's what we should all be aiming for, not being able to buy a horse that vets good.
I should have never said anything. I want you all to turn down every horse with every little bitty issue so I can buy it.
I think that's a great point for us to kind of conclude on. Us as sellers, we want veterinarians and prospective buyers to come to us and ask us about horses that they're genuinely interested in. What do I need to know about this horse? Is this horse okay? We are here to, give you the most information that we possibly can, and we know our horses may be imperfect in certain ways, but we also know, where they've come from and what they can overcome. So I'd like to kind of send home that message to everybody to communicate with your consigners and make this a profitable experience for everybody that's involved. We're all here to, have a successful sales season, and this is our livelihood in one way, shape, or form. So, don't be afraid to communicate, ask questions, engage with the sellers, the vets, whatnot. That's what we're all here for. So, thank you so much for being here to participate. Hopefully we'll host another one of these in advance of the September sale. If anyone was not here for the beginning of the panel discussion, we will have the recording posted onto the CBA and Farm Managers Club websites later this week, so you can watch it over as many times as you like. So thank you everyone for attending, and would love to receive any kind of feedback that you have afterwards for how to keep these going in the future. So thank you.
Do I have to sign a release for that to be?